You are listening to an exclusive interview on Bass Musician Magazine. The interview starts now.
Hey everybody, this is Raul for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with double bassist, composer, and professor at the New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music in New York City, Reggie Workman.
Hello, Raul. It's great to be here with you.
I'm always thrilled to talk with a double bassist, an upright player, because it's such an integral part of the bass community. Let's take a step back. How did you get started in music and on bass?
Well, that's a long story. At first, I got started on piano because my parents decided, oh, you got to study some music. You got to go downtown every Saturday and take lessons. And eventually, I used to have to go to my relative's house and study on an old raggedy upright, practice my lesson. And they eventually got a spinet and put it in the living room. And then I was able to do my practicing at home. So they saw this as a possibility of keeping me out of the street. And thank God that worked. The way I got involved with the bass was the streets called me away from the piano, which I am very sorry for, because that should have been my foundation if I had continued. But the streets called me in, basketball and baseball and all that called me. And then my cousin, who is Charlie Biddle, you may remember Biddle's place in Vancouver, in Canada. He had a band that used to, when they found out we had a piano, he would bring his band with Ellsworth Gooding and himself and all the people in his band to the house to practice. And once I found they were doing that, I would be there every time they had a rehearsal. So that was part of my lesson. And he would tell me, come here, boy, stand up on this chair. And he would put me on the chair and put the bow in my hand and say, it goes like this. And I began to feel and understand that what he was doing with the bass. And I said, I like that. That's my vocal cord. So that's what I did from that point on as a very young person. Now, in my junior high school, early days, they had no instruments in my neighborhood. I was from a poor area where the music program wasn't very well developed. And I asked for a bass. And they had no bass, but they said, here, boy, take this tuba. So they gave me a sousaphone, and I had to march around the field with the tuba. But I was learning the bass clef. And I was, on the field doing the things that, like, I went to school with Archie Shepp and Bill Cosby and Herb Adderley and all those guys. Kenny Barron eventually came along in the same school after I left town. But anyway, I went through those changes, and they eventually got a bass. And I started dealing with the bass and studying the bass. And Eddie Mathias, who was one of Philadelphia's premier bass players with the All-City Orchestra, would help me out, help me through things that I needed to go through, and made it possible for me to have those experiences that I hadn't really earned by studying in university or at school, or not even in elementary or high school, because it was just labor to try to keep this thing going. And we did that, and one thing led to the other. And some of our musicians in Philadelphia have gone through the same changes. In the meantime, there were many communities. Philadelphia was broken into parts, like West Philadelphia, South Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, where I was, Tioga, where Lee Morgan, and all. North Philadelphia was Sonny Fortune, Tony Pope, and guys like that study. So we all had our own little turf. It was just like in the old country. In Africa, you have different tribes, different communities, different stuff that each of those tribes knew, and that's the way it was in Philadelphia. And we crossed our paths with one another. We compared notes, and we studied. We learned who's doing what, and one thing led to the other. The more I grew as a person, the more my understanding of the need to find out what's happening with this music grew. So I stayed with that for a lifetime.
Now, your primary focus has been jazz. And jazz is, to my understanding, the true American music form that we can claim as something that had started here, even though I do find there's a universal nature to all music where it takes from all around the world. So there's things, you mentioned Africa and all kinds of interesting, components. In that focusing on jazz, you've also watched it evolve.
Put a pin in your thought right there, Raul, because you say the only American music form, which is a little bit shallow of reality. The Americans were the Indians.
This is true.
We were African Americans. The experience of the Africans had coming to the Americas is very unique from American music form, because the American Indian music is very different from African American Indian music. So each country has something. That's why I frown upon the name jazz, because it doesn't give you any geographic, historic, cultural implication as to what we're talking about. So this is not something that is a problem, but it's a thing that keeps us and the world from learning what this cultural creation is about.
I suppose where I'm going is that as we look at kind of the ongoing development, of course, with classical music, a lot of its roots being in Europe and Italy and Germany and all that, the unique characteristics of jazz as it evolved, and it continues to evolve, because even what I might describe as classic jazz, to me, the times of Benny Carter, Coltrane, Thelonious Monk, this kind of music that seemed to be, at least in my estimation, more for the general public. It was music that everybody could enjoy, and as it has evolved, a lot of it has gone into more of a fusion mode. It's a little more dissonant in some instances. It's been changing a lot, and so I think definitely there is a big distinction. And so that I'm glad that you're able to clarify this for us. But in the area that you grew up in, and what you were playing, tell us a little bit, because you did play with Coltrane and all these guys.
Yeah, so many great musicians coming out of Philadelphia, including Coltrane. Basically, we were a community, as I was saying to you before. Coltrane, who was very, very much present in the community where Cal Massey and his family was, the mosque that they all studied at and grew to their spiritual being. Coltrane would be there, and we would be in another area, but we were with ear to the ground, finding out what were they doing. There was a segregated union situation in Philadelphia. So you had Local 77, you had Local 274, where the black musicians were 274 and the white musicians were 77. And never between shall the two meet, because the job that goes to 77 did not come to 274. So we had to deal with that reality and still keep our ear to the ground and cross over as to what it is that we are getting and what it is that we're not getting, and learn both ways. It's not so much different today, but it happens in different ways. Coltrane grew and grew and grew, and we grew with him as well. He used to take jobs and he would go out of the country and come back. He became acquainted with McCoy Tyner and McCoy's mom in West Philadelphia, so he used to go. McCoy's mom had gotten him a piano very early and put it in her, I think she had a beauty salon. And McCoy and John used to go to the beauty salon and practice and practice and practice. And that's what McCoy and John were about for many years before the band even started. But they were close. And in Philadelphia, we had different groups. Eddie Campbell and McCoy Tyner and myself had a trio where we used to do constant Philadelphia jobs, and we would be the house trio for the House of Jazz in West Philadelphia. Then we would talk them into, why don't you get John Coltrane? And they would pretend they didn't hear it, and before we knew it, John Coltrane was booked in the House of Jazz. We were the house trio, and he was coming in, so we were learning John Coltrane's music. We already had been learning his character and so forth. There was a place where all the musicians used to go and talk and after jobs and go to abroad in Colombia to the restaurant and have breakfast and talk about the gigs and experiences and so forth. So it was that kind of community in Philadelphia. Each one of those areas, west, north, south, had their own kind of music and musicians who used to work together, practice together, compose together, study together, and compete with one another. So, in a way of speaking, like who was going to make the most noise to get the most calls for the most cabarets and gigs. In those days, you would play a job that would be for somebody's birthday party at Town Hall. It would be like the Savoy Ballroom of New York. You would have town hall birthday parties. You would have all kinds of social functions where there's always a band, always music. We would all want to be a part of that. If we were not a part of it, we would try to get there and listen to see what was going to happen anyway. So you had theaters, you had the clubs, you had downtown Peps and Showboat, where I was lucky enough to hear a lot of music. You had the place on Ridge where Freddie Frito used to live on Ridge Avenue that worked on an angle, and there was a guy that used to let Lee Morgan and I sneak in and listen to Bird and different people in the corner with a fruit bunch in front of us. So that was our school, and that was our life. That's the way we had to do. We had to find time when we should have been studying to get up for our lessons in school. We were running down, sneaking down to the club and sneaking in to listen to the music because we knew somehow in our subconscious, we knew that was our life and that we needed to know more about it. So we followed that just like a natural way of being. That was our calling.
Wow. And that's a good segue with teaching at the New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music. Now you are involved in molding and shaping these future musicians.
Well, that seems to be my calling, and that's what it's always been. Before me, it was my brothers and sisters who were educators, who always did something in the community to try to shape people in positive directions. And I think that growing up under that influence caused me to say, okay, this is the road that I want to take. This is what makes me happy. This is where I need to go. Aside from developing my own craft and life as a musician, I was always teaching somebody else, as well as learning from somebody else. So when I left Philadelphia, I stayed there for a long time, and we always had organizations that rallied around the music. If it wasn't local 802 down in South Philly, where Heath and Bobby Timmons and Mickey Roper and all of them lived close to there, it was some other area, North Philadelphia, where Tommy Monroe had a big band where we would have rehearsals. Johnny Splon would be there. And you'll notice the names are coming. John Strong was physically challenged, a trumpet player who John would come back and he would always tune into people who were doing something significant. And if he was able to bring that to the public, he would find a way to do it because he was developing so strong that he was able to make certain decisions for the companies. Consequently, he bought in Nicens, he bought in McCoy, he bought in myself, he bought in Steve Davis. That was a family. McCoy, Khadijah, Steve Davis's wife, and McCoy Timer's wife, Aisha, are all in the same family. The Masseys, where they all were from the same mosque, and they all studied together musically and life. That's the way things work. So the whole thing revolved around lifestyle, revolved around effort to develop as a person. And in developing yourself, of course, you're always going to be teaching other people. So that's what happened with me when I left Philadelphia. We came to New York, and I lost my dad, and I had to come back to Philadelphia once I came to New York, went back to New York, and and realized that there's the same problem in New York that it was in Philadelphia, where we, not second call and third call musicians, weren't getting the pit calls and the orchestra calls and so forth. So we weren't getting as many jobs. Just so, like in Philadelphia, where we used to have to go to the Salvation Army, get an old raggedy piano and go to a maker and have it redone, take it to the club and talk the club owner into making music every weekend. It's been an upward stride for all of us. And the same thing we had to do in Philadelphia is because of the position that the music ended up in this country. We found that when we got to New York, the same thing had to happen. Many great people were coming into New York, just as many great people were in Philadelphia, because it's right down the street from New York.
Yeah.
So many people from all over the country would come to Philadelphia because rent's cheaper, easier to live, jump on the bus and get up the turnpike to New York and do whatever has to be done or learn there, and then come back to Philadelphia and live a little easier life. And eventually, that life in New York called us to come there and stay because the commute is too much. There's a lot that I'm leaving out, many, many, many years and many things happening in between all this effort.
I think that kind of the key thing with all this is that there is a very concise regional element. As you've mentioned, everything that was happening in Philly, everything that was happening, New York City is a whole other scene, that they're close enough together that there's crossover and blending of the musical knowledge. And I even think how distinctive when you look at like New Orleans, where you've got more of your Dixieland style music, a whole different scene, a whole different things were happening kind of there as compared to what was happening up in the East Coast at a similar time. Realizing that as we look at things now, they just didn't happen easily. This was so much effort on the part of musicians like yourself. We have such a debt to those musicians that made it possible for us to enjoy the music that we enjoy today, which again carries me back to your students, the future of jazz. How, since you're having a chance to mold these young people, how does the future of this music, how's it looking?
Well, I think it's going to constantly grow and constantly get stronger, but it's not growing as fast and in the same way that it grew when I was young and when I was just out of high school coming to the bandstand. Mm-hmm. Now it's a different world. It's just like you sat here with Maya and worked to try to get Skype working. Those students already have Skype working. They already have the Real B. They already have the computer. They already have Sibelius. They already have iTunes where they can plug in any tune that they want to listen to it immediately, study it by rote, and hopefully compare the notes to what they hear if they are disciplined enough to do that. So the world and the music is moving much faster in a different way. But there's a lot of life that is being left out of music now. And part of the reason I'm happy to be at a place like the New School is because I can bring a lot of that aesthetic part of the music, the life that we have had to live through in order to go from one point A to point C in the music world. These students are just jumping into it because we have opened those doors for them. Mm-hmm. Because the world and technology has opened those doors for them. Just like I looked at the History Channel the other day, and the government, Washington, was in awe about what they saw about the movement of extraterrestrial people and spacecraft and so forth. I remember when I was young and I traveled to California, there was a truck driver who used to see those UFOs, and he gave me a book. I was there, I think, with Herbie Mann, I believe, and we were on North Beach, and the play that's went to the Hyde Park Suite. Mm-hmm. And the owner of the hotel there, who was a retired truck driver, somehow fingered me and said, "Look, you have to read this book." and that book I'm going way around the corner to get to this point. That book opened so many doors to me. It was by Adamski, I think this is his name. It was called Inside the Spaceships. And he said, you have to read this book. Once he gave it to me, I could not put that book down. There was so much, and it was relating to a lot of my experiences. Because in going to Detroit a lot with John and Art Reggie and all the different groups that I traveled with, I met Joe Blair. Now, these names should jump out to you like a light, but they don't, because you haven't been told about Joe Blair, who had but if I said that in front of Roy Brooks or Barry Harris or Yusuf Lateef or any of the people from that Detroit, they would know Joe Blair was the one who loved music and opened a shop. He was an inventor, very intelligent inventor, who worked for the Ford Company. And when Russia beat the U.S. to Sputnik and had the first reentry, and the U.S. realized they were falling behind, and Joe Blair, who had been going to Washington, saying, listen, man, you have to listen to me. I got what you need. You're falling behind. They say, go around the back and take out the trash. Oh. They listened to him. But when Russia made the feat of re-entry for their rocket, they came to Joe Blair, confiscated his laboratory, his works, his writing and everything, put him in Washington. I use that as a parable to show you that there's a lot of technical things that have happened in the world that the young people who haven't had the knowledge that we've had living and traveling and rubbing shoulders with these people. They just are there. And that's why I am happy to be in close contact with these youngsters still and able to bring some of these ideas and this knowledge to them, that they can understand that there's a wealth of knowledge in the universe that they have to tune into and not be just satisfied with sitting down in the classroom reading certain chapters of certain books. But they have to tune in universally to the reality of the way the species and the planet is growing. And they are a part of that group. And they have to realize where they are in the evolution of our planet and its intelligence. So it's not just about teaching the music, it's about living the life and evolving as a people. And I think as you look into the news and what's happening today with this administration, with the people, with the way the world is growing, and, I came by a Netflix thing that says, and now as they see us or something like that, over just condone. You have to look at all these things in order to really tie the ends or connect the dots from all these things that I'm saying. But getting back to your question about the way the music is going, the way the young people are growing, and what I am doing, what I've always done as an educator, teaching reverses itself. And so when I find that I'm bringing something to whomever I'm communicating with, I find out that their feedback and the way it's accepted to them or not accepted by them gives me an idea of the way the planet is growing and the way the species and the plants and the flowers and the mines and so forth are developing. And it helps me to continue to grow and helps me to continue to know where we're going as a species on this very young planet called Earth.
It certainly puts it in a perspective as part of the much bigger picture. Now, I do want to focus on a little part of the big picture, and that is your bass. Tell us a little bit about your instrument, how you get your voice.
Okay, I told you about Charlie Biddle, who stood me on the chair, and kind of like that vocal cord, and I liked what he was doing with it. And I followed that. And eventually went to the pawn shop, saved up my pennies from shining shoes and doing all that stuff. Went to the pawn shop and found an old K bass for $125 with no case. and I said, wow, I got a bass. It's a school couldn't get a bass. I got my own bass. That was during the time when I eventually came out of school. And then I would have to bring my instrument back and forth to the school, or prior to that, bring the school bass back and forth to study. And I knew that the quality of that instrument wasn't what it was supposed to be, but I had to find a way to make the sound what I wanted it to be. That's a personal thing. With all of us, bassists, we have our personal sound and we have our personal desire as to what we want the sound to be. Some of us know how to make it happen. Some of us don't understand that you are making the sound, the energy is coming through you as a developed being, through you into the instrument, and how you treat that contact and that transmission of that message is what your sound becomes. So that's something that's been growing with me all the time. And I eventually outgrew the K, outgrew small basses, outgrew basses that were falling apart. I eventually got a cover for the instrument, eventually began to get more quality, began to meet people with quality instruments, know what the sound was supposed to be about, and know what to look for and what the possibilities were. And eventually I developed and grew and acquired better instruments year by year, to the point where by the time I was playing with a lot of those bands that you see me having worked with over the years, you know my discography, so you can hear the way the sound of the instruments developed. When it got to the point where I was able to acquire super instruments, like when I got in position to get Charlie Hayden's bass, the Prescott. I knew that sound, and I knew what it was, and I knew what I was looking for. And the phone rang and said, I need money. I got to get out of town. My bass is in the shop. I don't have the money to get it out. Can you help me? Will you give me whatever you can and pay for the repairs that are being done on the instrument? And consequently, I ended up with the Prescott. And that sound that I was able to get from the Prescott was really the direction I was moving in. The Elements just brought Charlie to me. I knew him from California, from having traveled there with different groups and been going to the garages where the Coleman's bands was rehearsing, and Charlie was present. I knew the sound, I knew the instrument, but then he told me, well, man, I'm about to lose this bass because I got to get out of town. I said, whoa. I raped, scraped, borrowed, hustled, and did everything I could to get money to give to Charlie and go to, I think that was Olivera on 7th Avenue where the bass was at that time.
Wow.
I don't know whether Olivera is still alive. He was a repairman before the days of Dave Gage and all that. Dave Gage, by the way, is also a bassist. He's one of my students from UMass. And to me, that's a real success story. I'm still in touch with Dave. And we share notes. We share experiences from all those days when we had lessons and encounter. And then the dots get connected. Here he is in New York with the major repair shop. There is McCoy hiring the bass player of, I can't remember his name, McCoy's young bass player. Charnette Moffett was one of them. But I got Charnette Moffett his first bass. I gave him his first bass when I was studying. I used to run a music program at New Muse, where his dad was coming to do one of our concerts. And I found that he didn't have a bass, so I made a bass. I gave his father the bass to have his son play. And then Charnette grew to be one of the people. And as he grew to be a significant person, I'm sure that some of our experiences as exchange as we were growing, those seeds found its root and fertile soil in his mind and his development and his experience with his dad. and his experience with being exposed to people who were doing relevant things as far as the evolution of the music is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I think of a name, I think of a lot of things that happened, and dovetailing that with what I was talking about, the sound of the bass. I acquired that bass from Charlie Hayden. I learned how to get the sound out of it that I needed, not Charlie's sound, but the bass having hundreds of years of year-old wood had the ability to transmit this message that I was getting from on high out to the people. And therefore, I began to develop that sound. And I think that sound is one of the main things that people recognize you for when you do your music and your craft. Well, during that time, I was still in touch with John Coltrane. And John was the one Norman Granz had booked Dizzy Gillespie's band with Leo Parker and Mel Lewis and Bob Cunningham, who also had a pretty good bass, booked us on, and John Coltrane's quartet, all on the same concert. Norman Granz, that was Norman Granz's production. That was one of the first times that I made a trip like that. And wow, that experience that's a hell of an experience. And I won't even get into that now, but that was a time when I was traveling. Before I was able to pay to get Charlie's bass out of the shop, I was using my old bass, which was not very good, to go on this road with John Coltrane. And during that day, you may remember the South African, Humaskila, the South African group, Zoboy, all of them who had the South African band working. And the bass player was Midge Pike. I hope he's still alive. He's out your way. He had twins, Midge. Now, Midge used to hang out with us after the gig, and he used to say, Reggie, you need a bass. You can't play with John Coltrane with a bass like that. You must get yourself a bass. I think I'm going to work to find a bass for you. And, we were hanging out a lot, drinking, smoking, playing jam sessions and all, and became very close. I forgot about him after coming back to New York, getting involved with life. Forgot about him, and we would stay in touch by letter or whatever we could. But then, as I came back to New York and was studying, working to get that Charlie Prescott out of the shop, I finally got.
I think it's something with our generation as well, is that you worked towards a goal. You saved up, you worked to get that thing that you wanted, and nowadays people want instant gratification. They just want it now. But building up is such a great part of this.
Yeah, and a lot of times now there are a lot of people traveling back and forth, bringing basses from Europe, and makers are beginning to know how to make basses that sound close. So they have much more at their disposal. When we were growing up, it was only the classical orchestras and pit musicians who could afford and had the real quality instruments. We didn't have our hands on them. Nowadays, it's easier for the young people to get them. Many of my students have good instruments that are really great. Developing to that point, I was going to tell you the rest of the story. Was as I got finished paying and developing the Prescott, the phone rang with the same accent. Hey, Reggie, I'm in New York. Now, this guy who I'd met in Europe with the Coltrane group, who said he was going to find me a bass, and I forgot about it, was in New York. He was a bassist on the Mauritania, which is a South African boat that he had the band. He was in the band. And he went to Foot in England and found me a bass.
Oh, wow.
After I had already did everything I could to get Charlie Hayden's bass. He came to New York with another bass, which was equally as good, but of course, very different character than the Prescott. And it was so powerful, so beautiful, and he done so much to bring that bass all the way from England for me. I was crying inside because I said, damn, I just spent every dime I had on this bass. What am I going to do? And, he said, don't worry, this bass is yours. You can pay me as you can. Because he was working all the time on the boat. Yeah. He wasn't about reaching in my pocket. I gave him all the money I could and paid him until I could finally pay. Now I have two great basses and a little apartment that's about a little studio apartment down on 11th Street, right across the hall from Elvin Jones. And I got these two great basses, and damn, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to deal with it? So this was during the days of the Atlantic record with John Coltrane, where we were playing, all those things that we did with that particular project. And then Prescott had an E-flat neck, but the sights that Midge got for me had a G neck. So I had a problem with the intonation because there was two different things I was trying to get used to. So I went to the maker and had the maker, can you match these two instruments? Cut this D neck down to make an E-flat neck so that it's closer to the Prescott so that I can play more in tune. That was another trip that we had to go through in order to get to that. So that was one of the things that, well, it's still not exactly there. The way the bass was made, it couldn't be exact, but it was closer, and it helped me with getting to the church on time.
Gotcha.
The right note in the right intonation, and that's always been an ongoing quest of mine, to try to get to be able to live to the note before you hear it, know where it is and how it feels on the instrument. Well, each instrument felt different, so I had to go back and forth and get used to one or the other. So with the Vanguard situation, I had the sights. I had just gotten the sights. I think by then I had it cut down. But with the Atlantic project, I had the Prescott. And so that was a different thing. So different sound, and not only was it working with Coltrane, but working with all the young musicians around New York. That was my goal. There's so many great musicians in New York who are doing great things. You know my discography, so you know what all that was during those years. And that helped me to understand what the sound was supposed to be and how to develop it and get it to be where it became my personality in the sound, and how to treat the instrument so that it sounded the way I wanted it to sound. There's another thing that I tell students that I hope that somebody will be listening. Like, your sound of the instrument is, no matter what instrument, once you get the sound in your mind and in your psyche, what you want your instrument to be, what you want your sound to be, no matter what instrument you play, what comes through you is going to be similar to the sound that you heard from Jump Street that you're developing as a person. Now, as thinking of that and the electric bass, well, you have Con Ed, who you plug into artificial piano, and it's not the same kind of piano that you charge the sound with acoustic bass. You have electronics involved, and that's why a lot of the acoustic bass players don't like to use amplifiers, didn't like to use amplified sound and so forth, because they could not really get the sound that they wanted their vocal cord to express. It's getting closer now as we learn how to deal with electronics and we learn how to EQ the sound the way we want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's very different with electric bass. When I was younger, I used to play electric bass, and I knew that was the difference. I knew that was something that was. It's a different instrument. It's a guitar. It's not a bass. It's not a violin. And so I dealt with that for a few years, and I just decided this is not what I want my vocal cord to sound like. So I put it down, and then along comes, I think it was Curtis Fuller with a date I did with Curtis, and he wanted me to play electric bass, and I reluctantly picked it up, but only for that moment. That's the only time I ever recorded professionally with electric bass. I think one or two things on that record I did on electric, but once I put that down, I never picked it up again because I said, this is not me. So it's not the sound that I'm looking to project to the world. So I never picked it. And there are so many great people like Stanley and Wooten and everybody who's done so many great things with electric bass. Hey, why should I spend time going over into that area? They got that covered.
Yeah.
And let me do what I do the way that I do it and continue to try to grow in this arena. And I hope that I can, be as creative as I need to be as they are in their area.
Well, and with that, what you do, what are your plans for the future? What do you have any projects you're working on, or?
Whoa. Yeah, working with right at this moment. I'm working on the music since I met Maya, and we began to do all kinds of artistic things together. I've been working with her as much as possible. So a lot of the music that's been created has been created around things that we collaborate on. Mm-hmm. And now she's working on Ophelia. And I have to deal with one of the theatrical pieces that she's working on. I can deal with the music for that. And that's one of my goals right now, to try to get that music to where it's supposed to be, where it can be something compatible to what she's doing theatrically, and bring a musical contribution to that piece, that theatrical piece she's working on.
If people want to stay on top of what you're doing, the best place to look would be reggieworkmanmusic.com?
Yeah, I think that's the best place, and I usually try to put everything that I'm about right on that site, because that's a focal point where everybody can reach it. I was talking to a person about archiving what we do in the world, and many of us as musicians have not thought about that at all. And the site is one way of archiving it, but then there has to be archived. Your things have to be archived and digitally now, so that people around the world can tune into it and learn what you are doing, and tune into what you and I are speaking about, and know where my head is and has been, if they are interested in who I am and who I have been.
Yeah. And I would also add, because I feel very happy for your students at the New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music, because they have a lot more time with you. I appreciate you taking time to talk to me, but they have this direct exposure. So people that are interested in that, I should mention newschool.edu if they are prospective students and would like to enjoy from this super wealth of your experience and your knowledge, and just, I mean, we can't do it justice just even chatting for a while today, but that would be another way that they might be able to further their musical journey by being influenced by you.
Sure. And somehow it'd be great to know who they are and what they're doing, and what they deem valuable, and so that we can exchange notes.
Well, I'm good. I won't keep you because I know you're super busy. Reggie, thank you so much for taking time. Folks, you've seen him here, Reggie Workman on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks for bassing out with us here on bassmusicianmagazine.com.